The Wamsley family of Mansfield, Texas, seemed to have it all: a beautiful home, financial success, and the quiet comfort of a close-knit community. Rick and Suzanna Wamsley were beloved figures, known for their generosity and hard work. But beneath the veneer of this perfect American life festered a toxic blend of greed and resentment, a darkness that resided within their own bloodline. On a cold December night in 2003, this darkness erupted in a scene of unimaginable violence, shattering the peace of their home and exposing a conspiracy so cold-blooded it would shock the nation. This is the story of a son who traded his parents' lives for an inheritance, and the brutal, bungled plot that led to the murders of Rick and Suzanna Wamsley. Remember to comment, like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of the Calendar of Crime. Also, we're coming soon to Substack. Rick Wamsley, 51, and Suzanna Wamsley, 49, were a successful couple who had built a comfortable life. Rick was a respected businessman, and Suzanna was a devoted mother. Their estate, valued at approximately $1.65 million, was intended to provide for their two children, Andrew and Sarah. Andrew, however, was not the dutiful son his parents had hoped for. He was a young man plagued by financial irresponsibility, constantly needing money, and deeply resentful of his parents' control over his inheritance. The Wamsleys had set up a trust that would only grant Andrew access to the bulk of the money when he turned 35, a condition that fueled his impatience and, ultimately, his murderous intent. Andrew Wamsley found willing partners in his dark scheme. The first was his girlfriend, Chelsea Richardson, a young woman who was equally motivated by the promise of wealth. The second was Andrew's friend, Suzanna Toledano, who was brought into the fold with the promise of a share of the inheritance. The three of them began to meticulously plot the demise of Rick and Suzanna. Their goal was simple: eliminate the parents, trigger the inheritance, and live a life of luxury. The sheer audacity and cold calculation of their plan are staggering, but their execution proved to be as clumsy as it was cruel. The initial attempts by the trio were almost comically inept, a series of failures that only served to harden their resolve. Their first plan involved poisoning. Andrew and his co-conspirators attempted to lace the Wamsleys' drinks with cyanide. However, they either used too little or failed to administer it correctly, and the attempt was unsuccessful. The Wamsleys simply became ill, attributing it to a bad flu or food poisoning, completely unaware that their own son was trying to murder them. This failure only pushed the conspirators toward a more desperate and direct approach. The plan was to tamper with the Wamsleys' vehicle, making it appear as though they had died in a tragic, accidental crash. Again, the plot was poorly executed. The tampering was either insufficient or the Wamsleys were simply lucky, and they survived the attempt unscathed. 2 failures had passed, and the inheritance remained out of reach. The conspirators, particularly Chelsea Richardson, grew increasingly frustrated and impatient. They realized that subtlety was not their strength, and a more brutal, hands-on approach was required to achieve their goal. With their previous attempts at covert murder having failed, the conspirators decided on a direct, violent home invasion. The plan was to break into the Wamsley home, murder Rick and Suzanna, and stage the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. This time, they would not rely on poisons or mechanical failures. They would use a gun and a knife. The date was set for December 11, 2003, just weeks before Christmas. Suzanna Toledano, who had a history of drug use and was easily manipulated, was designated as the primary killer, with Andrew and Chelsea providing the means and the motivation. On the night of the murder, Suzanna Toledano, accompanied by a fourth individual, Hilario Cardenas, who was later granted immunity for his testimony, entered the Wamsley home. Andrew had provided them with a key and instructions on how to navigate the house. The scene that unfolded was horrific. Rick Wamsley was shot multiple times and stabbed. Suzanna Wamsley was also brutally attacked, shot, and stabbed. The violence was excessive, a clear indication of the rage and desperation of the attackers. The conspirators then attempted to stage a robbery, taking a few items to make the scene look convincing before fleeing the house, leaving the bodies of Rick and Suzanna behind. The bodies were discovered the next morning, and the Mansfield Police Department was immediately on the scene. The brutality of the crime suggested a violent home invasion, but investigators quickly noted inconsistencies. The staged robbery seemed amateurish, and the level of violence felt personal. Andrew Wamsley, the grieving son, was among the first to be questioned. His behavior was suspicious, and his alibi was flimsy. Detectives began to dig into the family's financial situation, quickly uncovering the $1.65 million inheritance and Andrew's history of financial strain. The motive was clear: greed. As the investigation intensified, the cracks in the conspirators' alliance began to show. The police focused on Andrew and his associates. It was Suzanna Toledano who eventually broke under the pressure. Facing the possibility of the death penalty, she agreed to cooperate with the authorities. Her testimony was the linchpin that unraveled the entire plot. She detailed the planning, the failed attempts, and the brutal execution of the final plan, implicating Andrew Wamsley and Chelsea Richardson as the masterminds. Suzanna Toledano pleaded guilty to murder in exchange for a life sentence, avoiding the death penalty. Her testimony was crucial in the subsequent trials of Andrew Wamsley and Chelsea Richardson. Andrew Wamsley was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. The jury saw through his facade of grief and recognized the cold, calculated nature of his betrayal. Chelsea Richardson, whom prosecutors argued was the true mastermind and the most ruthless of the group, was also convicted of capital murder and initially sentenced to death. The convictions brought a measure of justice to the Wamsley family, but the emotional scars remained. Sarah Wamsley, Andrew's sister, was left to grieve the loss of her parents and the devastating betrayal by her brother. Chelsea Richardson's death sentence was later commuted to life in prison without parole in 2012, following a successful appeal, based on a technicality regarding jury instructions. The case remains a chilling example of how the lure of money can corrupt and destroy a family from within. The Wamsley story serves as a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest danger lies not in the shadows, but in the people closest to you. The murders of Rick and Suzanna Wamsley are a tragic testament to the destructive power of greed. A successful life, a loving marriage, and a bright future were all extinguished by the selfish ambition of a son and his accomplices. Thanks for watching. Please comment, share, like, and subscribe for future episodes from the Calendar of Crime.